Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Joe Hill. I'm Director of Towner in Eastbourne, and I'm so delighted that you can join us today for this fantastic Talking Loud event. It's so brilliant to see so many people register for the event, and I can see a great audience number as well. So it's fantastic to be able to hear these two brilliant artists talking about their experiences and how they're handling the sort of changes that are going on within both our society and the sector as well. I think we're all grappling with these interesting issues, and I think it'll be hopefully a very interesting talk. So I'm just going to go through a few formalities, and then I'm delighted to introduce our speakers today. So welcome to all of you to our Talking Loud event, Helen Cammock and Shani in conversation. I'd also like to welcome Sue McLean, British Sign Language English interpreter, and Sue will be visible throughout the event. This is the second in our Talking Loud series of events hosted jointly between Towner Eastbourne and the Delaware Pavilion. The talks aim to give you the opportunity to hear from people across the creative industries. Talking Loud is part of the Southeast Creatives Programme, which is a development and support programme for small businesses in creative, cultural and digital sectors across East Sussex, Kent and Essex. And delighted to say it's funded by the European Regional Development Fund. Towner and Delaware are local hubs for the programme and promoting and hosting events and activities throughout the last few years. I'd like to thank those behind the Southeast Creatives Programme, especially East Sussex County Council and Sally Staples, and also Locate East Sussex, Philip Johnson and the team for their support in building the programme and promoting it. So a bit of housekeeping. Today's event will last for about an hour till about 3 p.m. Live captioning is running throughout the event and can be turned on using the controls on Zoom. Please do excuse any errors in the transcription, as this is an automated facility. So you can focus on the discussion, we won't be including any live online chat or Q&As, partly because we were inundated with brilliant pre-submitted questions, which have been given to both Helen and Ty, and we'll try and cover as many possible in the talk. So now to our speakers. I'm really excited to hear from both of them and to introduce you. Helen and Ty were both jointly awarded the Turner Prize in 2019 alongside Lawrence Abu-Hamdan and Oscar Murillo. Helen Cammock works across film, photography, print, text and performance. She produces works stemming from deeply involved research processes that explore complexities of social histories. Alongside the Turner Prize in 2019, Helen won the Max Mara Prize for Women, and major exhibitions have included Wising Art Centre, Void in Derry, Cubit Gallery, Turner Contemporary and Whitechapel Art Gallery. And later this year, Serpentine Gallery in London will present Helen's project, Radio Ballad, Bass Notes and Sightlines. And Helen will be in conversation with the fabulous Ty Shani as well. Ty's multidisciplinary practice comprises performance, film, photography and installation, and revolves around experimental narrative texts. Her work has been shown at Turner Contemporary, Glasgow International, Wising Art Centre, Serpentine Gallery and the Tate. So really delighted. If I could welcome Ty and Helen to join us on the screen. I'm just going to get us started really. I'm going to disappear in a minute as well, so you can really focus on what I've got to say. But I'm going to start us off with a question to both of you. And that is, what drew you into being an artist and what motivates you?
That's quite a big question. Ty, should we just describe ourselves as a kind of little introduction? So I am sitting in a room with a wooden door behind me. I am a Black woman of mixed heritage with very short shaven hair. So hopefully that gives a picture of me.
I am a woman with long hair and glasses sitting in her studio and looking at the screen and about to have a wonderful conversation, I hope, with Helen.
Okay, cool. So who wants to go first about how we started, motivations?
I'm going to let you go first, Helen.
Okay. So what made me want to be an artist? Really, I think the truth of it is I had imagined as quite a late teenager and a kind of early 20s that I was going to be a singer. And that's what I thought I was going to do. It was the way that I expressed myself. It was, I began writing poetry when I was kind of in my mid-teens, and then that became songwriting, and then it became performance. So by the time I was about 15, I was performing on a circuit around the Southwest, and that's what I imagined I was going to do. I went to university, and before I knew it, I was kind of moving into working in social care and social services. And by the time I got back to about 30, I realized I had this huge hole, a creative hole. So my partner at the time said, do something, just go and do something with that hole. So I went and I did a photography evening class, and I spent a lot of time in a dark room, and I found this space that felt the same as the space I'd found when I sat by myself in my bedroom writing songs. And I realized that I really needed that, and I'd missed it. And so that kind of became a motivation for going back to college. So it was a kind of second time to go back to university, having just done this evening class and quickly getting together a portfolio. So that was the motivation, really. And it's that space for me, which is about being able to say what I need to say. It's about expression, whether that's about myself personally, or what I see around me, or how I'm affected or impacted by the world that I inhabit, I guess.
Yeah, so I don't know if it's lucky or not, but I grew up with a very artistic family, I guess. I grew up in a commune in India, and my parents were hippies, and they painted and wrote and took photographs. So I guess the idea of being an artist was always very much around me. My aunt is an artist, and I actually showed some of her paintings in that little room next to, in the Turner Prize. So it's always been part of my life. I didn't really have a moment that was particularly kind of revelatory in terms of me wanting to do this. It was just kind of, I mean, I guess like maybe it's quite common in hippie families that they expect you to do something creative. So in a weird way, I feel like I did kind of stay very much within the expectations of my family. But I guess that also gave me a lot of focus about what I wanted to do. From the age of 12, it was always, that was what I wanted to do. When I was 18, my father passed away, and he left us in quite a difficult kind of economic situation. And my mum said to me that she thought I should do something that was a little bit more viable in terms of a livelihood, really, because we didn't have any money at all left. And we kind of had this compromise that I would study photography as a weird kind of, I guess, you know, you can do jobs, at least. They're jobs that, you know, that aren't necessarily that creative, but you can document things, you can take photographs of people. So I studied photography, but I dropped out after 2 years. I found the whole process harrowing, of crits and being kind of subjected to these discussions around your work. And I didn't have the emotional fortitude really to be able to go through it. So I walked out in a crit. And then I came to London, and I was a fashion photographer, and I started showing my work more as an artist because of a weird series of events. But eventually I decided that this was definitely what I wanted to focus on completely. And I came to London, and I mean, I've told this story before, but I called the White Cube and I told them I wanted to show my work. And
here I am.
They were quite flummoxed by, you know, what to do. The receptionist was a bit like, I don't know what you want from me. But then, you know, it became more and more central to my life. I've always had loads of jobs. I worked in a dildo workshop. I was an usher in cinema. I worked in an archive. I was a barista. I managed a cafe. I mean, I did literally hundreds of jobs to keep it going. But it's really almost like a kind of interface through which I understand the world, through which I can travel through the world, both on a kind of material level, but also on a metaphysical level, on an intellectual and philosophical, emotional level. It's really the kind of matrix of how I engage with the world. So yeah, that's kind of about, my work.
Yeah, well, I mean, what's interesting is just when you say that is the kind of resonance, I suppose, with fathers and with family. And, you know, my dad was an amateur artist, would have loved to have gone to art school, but it wasn't really possible for him. Like quite recently, I found a letter where he came as an 18-year-old in like 1942, I think it was, into the Second World War in the RAF. And then he was sent back, even though he'd met and married someone. But what he did was he did some teacher training. And I found a letter the other day saying, this man has real talent. I suggest that he goes to art school. And of course, my dad never got to go to art school. And interestingly, he was, when I said to him I was going to go back to college, he was completely devastated, like, oh my God, your pension, oh my goodness, you're not going to have a, you know, you're not going to have a career, you're not going to have security, because that was what he felt he needed and sort of instilled in us, or he hoped he'd instilled in us. Actually, he didn't, but he tried to instill in us that we needed to be doctors or lawyers or something, solicitors. You know, he imagined I was going to be a barrister. This was what he'd imagined in his mind. So he couldn't really make sense of it when I decided that I wanted to go and do something that was much more in flux, that was much more about something that was moving within me, but around me and in the world. And so it's really interesting how we kind of negotiate ourselves in relation to our families, and then what they require or need from us as well.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, I think it is interesting, the kind of, you know, I was very lucky. I know a lot of people don't have that kind of privilege of having a family that supports you doing something as kind of precarious as being an artist.
Yeah.
So I was very lucky in that way. And I mean, you know, the thing is, it takes so long to actually find yourself in a position where you can begin thinking about not having to support yourself in other ways.
Yeah.
And I think that was very meaningful for my family, actually, when suddenly, you know, I was able to start teaching.
Yeah.
You know, or do things that were related even, you know, I'm not saying even like just supporting myself as an artist, which I haven't been able to do yet, but, you know, being able to do related things to support myself was very important for them. And it is interesting how these things kind of translate in different ways for different people. You know, what does it mean to be doing well, or for them not to worry, let's say, you know what I mean? To not be a source of kind of worry is kind of an amazing feeling as well.
Yeah, I mean, we've had in quite a few questions. There was a huge long list of questions, so we're going to try and work with some of them, but there were lots of concerns. I think it felt like concerns to me from early career artists who were just asking, my goodness, how do you manage? How do you manage to sustain a practice, keep motivated, keep your emotional well-being going when you feel like things, you know, sometimes it's like wading through mud, isn't it? When you feel like you need to make things, you want to make things, but you might have 3 or 4 or 5 jobs at the same, ongoing at the same time, very different jobs. I mean, you've kind of described a list, but that idea that you know, maybe works 60 hours a week, maybe more for some people. And it's really full on and really hard. And so we've had questions about how do you do it? So maybe we should maybe talk about how each of us tries to kind of navigate that.
Yeah, absolutely. Should I go first?
Go for it. Yeah. Go for it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, first of all, I get asked this a lot. That's the first kind of question. It's like, how do you kind of get going, or how do you begin? And I feel it's only fair to kind of point out to what extent the landscape, the economic landscape, has changed over the last 20 years. I arrived in London in 2001. There were loads of artist-run spaces. There were lots of places that didn't really have any aspirations to become commercial or establishment. They were just places that were more run by artists or by curators that were maybe more experimental in their approach. And it was a very different kind of world. And I think that that's one of the difficulties in conveying what is useful, is that when people's also relationship with time and labor and money was different, because I worked in a cafe and I could pay for a room in a shared house. You know, I don't think that would be possible now in London.
Yeah.
Do that, you know. So people's conception of the relationship between money and time was different, which meant that, for example, for me, you know, like friends that were putting on exhibitions, no one was paid. I mean, not even the transport. You'd like bring your stuff in an IKEA bag on the bus, you know, and then, so I think those kind of things are very different now, you know. So it's a very, and the idea of financial survival, particularly if you're an artist in a big city where the cost of living is so kind of intense, is a really difficult question. And I mean, I always go back to this, and I feel that the structure of how people are paid has to change. The relationship of how people can think about being an artist and what that means. You know, if you're in a show where you have to pay for everything, that's going to be so difficult in the economic reality of, you know, 2020, or even before the pandemic. And I can imagine after the pandemic, it's going to be even more acute. So I think there are certain things that are real problems. I think in terms of keeping going, maybe is more of a question that transcends temporal obstacles, let's say.
Yeah.
For me, I've always felt that there's a core to my relationship with my work that sits outside completely all of these spaces, including the one we're now. It's something that kind of the first step out is an articulation of what is your practice, let's say. That's like the first kind of contact with the outside world. But there's something in the core that is unspeakable, that's ineffable. And there's a relationship there that is completely like, it's an engine, you know? And there's something about that integrity of that relationship that I will not allow to be corrupted by anything. And that is what keeps me going, I think, is that curiosity, that engagement that I have with that part of my practice that doesn't have contact with the world in a way. It goes through many filters when it does have contact eventually, but there's something very, very internal that there's a question at the bottom of that I need to answer, you know?
I mean, I guess I can follow on completely from that, because I also have that. It's an inner space that I go into when I'm making work, when I'm thinking about work, when I'm ruminating on ideas. It's the place that I go, that I share with very few people. And as you say, those thoughts, feelings are mediated, because actually what we make, what we produce is mediated, always mediated in preparation for engagement. So there are all those other strategies that come into place when you make something. But the bit that's in here, that comes from the bit that I go into, that's the internal world that I go into, is one that is very, very closed and very, very tight inside me. And I have to allow myself the space. Sometimes I don't feel that I always have the kind of space in my life to go into it. And that's really frustrating. So that's the balance of what you're describing, is, you know, having to have many projects, potentially having many jobs, potentially, in order to survive. But in order to go into that space, you need to have time, and you need to be able to focus on that. And I think sometimes that's something that is not really acknowledged. Maybe we don't 100%. Acknowledge it ourselves, but I think curators don't always acknowledge that, or people who are you're working with in terms of your career on whatever level, you know, whether that's even at art school. Sometimes, you know, like you, we both teach, and there are situations where I think students will come in feeling like they don't know what it is that's in that bit right now. And you have to be able to reassure someone and say, this is not all about production, this is about the space within. And I'm learning that, because I think I do get caught up in this, oh, I must produce. And I do that in kind of fits and starts. And sometimes I think, oh yes, I must work under pressure. And then when I have lots of space, I'm like, oh my goodness, what do I do with that space? But that kind of dilemma and those kinds of conflicts, I guess, for me, are what keep me going in terms of motivation. But as well as, I wanted to say that one of the things that really has kept me going is having people that believe in me. Now, those people don't have to be in the art context, but they have to believe in me. Like, they actually just have to believe in who I am, and they have to believe in what I'm trying to do in the world. They might not understand or be interested in some of the kind of strategies that I'm using, but they're there. And I feel like I've been really lucky that along the way in my life, I have had those people who don't. I've had many people who go, oh my God, you're so crazy. Why would you do this? Why are you changing your career? Why are you spending all this time and energy? But the people that have stayed with me are the people that have kept me going. And so I guess that brings me on to this idea for people of network.
I'd like to just interject that, because for me, I was thinking about what you were saying, and I was just thinking that, like, I've felt often very motivated by spite. And that I felt very motivated actually by the opposite as well, where people dismissed me, or, you know, I mean, I think particularly because I didn't go to any art school, I never had that kind of, that initial person that says, yes, we believe in this person, you know, which is like the kind of gatekeeping of, like, you get into a good art school, that means that, you know, you're good or whatever. And also because what I was doing was so unfashionable for so long, you know, that I felt like spite has been like this incredible, like, I'll show you, has been like a real motivational force for me, definitely.
That sounds like resilience. That doesn't sound like spite.
Yes, it's resilience. That's right.
This thing about going, do you know what? I can do this, you know, I can do that. And I would say that that's something I have in my little inner space from a lifetime of being told or having the message that you don't belong, or you won't be able to do it, or you won't do it well enough, or so I have that as well. And that's a kind of inner core. I know who I am and I know what I can do. And I think if you don't have that, then there are ways to kind of help you to kind of I guess boost that somehow by having those kind of safe people in your life. They don't, you know, as I said, they don't all have to understand exactly what it is you're doing, but it's about acceptance as well. And that's a real motivator. I think people don't understand it as one, but I think it is, because it allows you to take risks, I guess.
Totally. And you know what you were saying about, like, finding time to do these things. I mean, I think that that's a really big thing that has been eroded, actually, is this idea that people can operate in a very fragmentary way, like the artists can operate, you know, that you have to answer your emails and then you have 2 hours to make art or whatever. And it doesn't work that way. You know, sometimes you need 10 days to get to a point where you're making something good, or that you've thought about something in a kind of coherent, more profound way. And to me, you know, that's something that I find incredibly frustrating, is how you know, there's a lot of administrative kind of power in the art world, let's say, right now. And not everybody can do that. You know, not all artists can be available all the time to kind of answer these administrative questions. And sometimes I feel like the core of it, which is actually making the work, having the space, support, resources to make work, gets neglected underneath like these kind of demands. I think it's a huge issue, actually.
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to be an administrator, you have to be an intellectual, because people want you to be interesting and clever. You have to be a kind of communicator, so a public figure in some ways, and yes, and then you're expected to make as well. So it's not an easy space to kind of find yourself in. And you know, we've had questions as well. There were quite a few questions about funding, grants, support, and I mean, I think that's a really tricky one. Now I feel like I'm in a position where, for example, you know, the first lockdown happened and I was on the list of nominees for the Paul Hamlin, and Paul Hamlin decided that they were going to spread it between everyone, all 100 of the people who'd been nominated. And so that £10,000 enabled me to get through. Like, I can live on very little, and that enabled me to get through. But then what I had to consider was that I didn't apply for the Arts Council one, because I also knew there would be a lot of artists who hadn't got that. So it's this kind of game that we play about trying to have this kind of collegiate head, this collegiate mind, and understanding our position in it now, because for me it feels like it's shifted hugely and very quickly over a couple of years. But before that, when I first came out of my master's, like I've never had any Arts Council funding ever in my entire life. I've had 3 applications that Arts Council officers said were great. And when I'd worked in organisations, I co-ran a festival, you know, we were really successful in writing applications, but I never managed to get it for myself. And it really hit me really, really hard, to a point that I made a decision that I wasn't going to apply for any, and I still haven't, and I'm sure I will one day, but I haven't. But what I decided was that I had other skills, and I became a facilitator, and I earned my money doing that, knowing that I wasn't going to earn my money as a practicing artist. And so those 2 things had to run alongside each other, and it kind of defined the way that I worked as well as an artist. And now that's started to change, but I think funding is a really, really difficult one, particularly when you're kind of early career and you've just come out of art school. It's a very difficult space to find yourself in.
Totally. I mean, I think also, you know, that question, there were lots of questions about funding. And I think that there's 2 sides to that question. One is the question around funding outside of a pandemic. And then there's surviving in the pandemic. And same as you, I was a recipient of that Paul Hamlin 10,000 that completely saved my life.
Yeah.
But at that moment when we received that, we had no idea how long this period was going to last. And I remember, you know, when news of this bailout happened, and that all these organizations were being bailed out, which I'm very happy about. But I did think to myself, why is there no stipulation that some of this has to go to artists? You know, why are artists left to fight for grants from the Arts Council, literally for survival now? You know, the thing is that I think that the level of success rate now is at 23%. Normally it's 50 something. And, you know, it's obvious that people have no other place where artists have no other resources. I wasn't eligible for any of that funding from self-employed because of, you know, how we have these mixed economies of part teaching, part this, part that. So, you know, to me, that there's something about that, I'm sorry to say this, that doesn't sit well with me, that there are, you know, hundreds of thousands of art world people on furlough, and I don't feel like they should be fired or lose their jobs over this. But the fact that artists have had no provision put in place for them, it is kind of like funny, do you know what I mean? That like people, this whole industry it's very, very fragile right now. I understand that. But the artists actually, the only resource they have is competition, which is like competing for grants from the Arts Council. And I know this from talking to friends, other artists, people are inventing projects to be able to survive now. You know, they're like, how can I get access to something, you know, think up a project, you know. So it's kind of like there's still something to me about the relationship of what contributions artists do and how that's reflected in their kind of how their labor is valued in terms of the economy of it. And you know, this is exacerbating it, because basically when we come out of the pandemic, you know, people that are not reliant or don't have generational wealth or don't have people that can help them financially through this are not going to be in a position to continue, you know. So like, to me, I think it's interesting thinking back at the beginning of the pandemic. I was so grateful for that 10,000, and I had no idea how long it would last, you know, as well. And I have caring responsibilities as well. But one thing that I noticed was at the beginning, there was an openness and a kind of, it also coincided with, you know, the Black Lives Matter protests, and it felt like institutions were really and organizations were really questioning how they can do better, how can they change, the structures in a more fundamental way. But over the course of the pandemic, I feel like they've disappeared a little bit, these people. I don't, where are all the directors of music? Where are they? Like, it's like no one's vocal, no one's fighting for support for artists. Artists are, saying things in public platforms, but there isn't like a kind of coherent, supportive position by people that are closer to the seat of power than we. Ultimately, artists have very little power in this.
Well, I mean, and it's about, it's about art generally in the world, isn't it? Like, I mean, we were talking about this, was it last week, when we were just talking about the idea of, unionizing as artists in a way that maybe musicians do, or actors do, but actually that again places all the responsibility back on you to develop agency and start to kind of make and changes and shift things. And actually it's a space where there would be no art world without artists. Like, it needs to be fed. This world that we inhabit, this ecosystem, needs to be fed, and we are the people that are doing the feeding. The students that we work with are the future of doing the feeding of kind of this ecosystem that we need to protect, because it's really important. And it's about, art in schools. It's about art schools like, the ones that we teach in. It's about art projects across the country. It's about the museums and the institutions. And people are having some of those conversations, but they're not talking about artists and how we can support artists to survive, and not just survive. Like, we, as artists, we need to keep working on our practice. It needs to evolve as we evolve as human beings. And without support, that's not going to happen, or it will fall back to, it will only be people who can sustain themselves financially, because they have, generational wealth, or because they are in a relationship with someone who's really rich, or because they don't experience particular barriers that we know exist. It might be that at certain moments, who you are, what you represent and what you talk about is fashionable, but that doesn't mean you're going to have a career, like a long-term career. So it's about having kind of support systems in place, and it's about having people actually putting their neck on the line to support you as I don't mean as an individual artist, but I mean art.
No, absolutely.
In general.
Absolutely. And I think that there's something quite also uncomfortable about, like talking about, a very much needed conversation about race and in the art world, but not acknowledging how that intersects with the economics of society. Is completely naive. It's pointless, and it's almost pointless. These things need to happen together. There needs to be an acknowledgement. If you look at the median of a white household in the UK and the median of a black household in the UK, there's a massive disparity. There's a massive wealth gap. This plays out in all, like, way before people arrive at a point where they're showing work. I mean, yeah.
So something needs to shift, and it's really hard. I don't know how it's going to shift. And what it feels like is, at the moment, is that the responsibility is lying with artists to say the things that we're saying right now in this conversation. Many other artists are saying it in many other spaces. The Artist Essential campaign is saying it. It's being said, but it's not really being called out. And, there aren't the kinds of demands from institutions being made on government.
No.
I mean, it's interesting how many people that I hear talking about how hard it is to work from home, how hard it is to not work with a team, how hard it is not to have a manager, how hard all the things that as an artist you have to, as a freelancer, not just an artist, but as a freelancer, you need to do for yourself. But the kind of, still there's this idea that we are just playing. So, people can say, oh, I'm an artist. Oh yeah, but what do you do really? Or what do you do the rest of the time? Or so it's about a cultural shift.
Totally. And also, I mean, I don't know how this is, I don't know how to articulate this completely, but there's definitely this kind of idea that, there's a body of artists, and everyone's dispensable in a way or replaceable, but not everybody is. Do you see what I mean? You can't dispense of artists altogether. And that's the shift, is that, like, you know, for years, the kind of power structures in the art world have been predicated on that you are grateful to be given opportunities. You know, you do whatever needs to happen for the projects to happen at a level that you're happy with, even if it means not taking a fee, even if it means borrowing money. I mean, you know, we know all this very well. And now that there's this horrendous kind of pandemic that's going to have so much detrimental economic effect that we're going to feel for years, it needs to happen now. There needs to be a reassessment, you know, because all the talk of the kind of trans rights, race, all these things that happen in the art world, all these like conversations that are radical that the art world facilitates, they need to stand behind that. They need to stand behind those ideas. It can't just be like we side with the Tory government in how we run the place, but we're going to show work that's completely in ideological opposition to that.
Yeah.
You know, that it's not fair. It's not good. And, you know, the government are now talking about having a kind of hand in what they consider free speech in universities. You know, there's ideological decisions that are happening in government that as an industry, we need to be in opposition to. We can't just kowtow to this.
Yeah. Which, I mean, we could take a leaf out of the Book of Education with teachers in terms of the different ways in which the teachers' unions have stood up when ideological clashes have happened, and impositions. It's about, you know, oppressive kind of regimes, which is basically what we're living in.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so.
Absolutely. But that's it, is that like there are these, you know, like the whole kind of thing about people who are being silenced, or, you know, the whole kind of free speech debate that's happening about who's allowed or invited to universities or not, that these people can then sue a university. You know, this is fascism. I'm sorry.
We agree.
Yeah,
we agree. So should we try and go for some questions?
Yes.
Let's try and do that. Okay, so there's one here that's maybe it's interesting because we're very different, I think. So Jack Southern said, how important is your digital presence in developing your creative career? Shall I go first?
Yeah.
Mine is like, it's not remotely important. Like, I don't use social media at all. And whenever I do, I have to ask someone to help me to do it, because I'm so uninterested in it that it's never, I've never had a website. That's obviously managed to work for me in whatever ways, I guess, because I communicate in different ways. But it's not anything that I ever consider or think about. And we were talking about this around the time of the Turner Prize, that I decided I wasn't going to read anything, I wasn't going to look anything, I didn't want to have anything to do with it. Yes, I've done lots of interviews, but in terms of trying to think about myself or my career or the way that I communicate, which is mostly about that, really. It's a different kind of tool for communication. It's kind of not in my life.
Yeah, for me, it's very much in my life, I think. I don't know why it's so in my life for, I can't quite explain it, actually, but I definitely, I think I've always been very interested in communicating in the most democratic way possible. So in my friend's Pill and Gallia collective, for my birthday, I think it was in 2006, bought me my domain, taishani.com. And that was, and helped me build a website, like in 2006. And at the time it was so frowned upon, you know, because art was seen as something that, you know, you should only have access to, you know, if you go to the gallery or you buy the catalogue. And I always wanted, like, the idea that someone, I remember getting an email very, very early on from someone in Texas saying they loved a film I'd put online. And this was before I had any kind of profile or visibility. And I loved that feeling that, like, someone could stumble upon it, or that people could engage with it. And then I think with time, I realized that also I wanted to use my voice to speak out about things that I felt were relevant for me to speak out on. And I've tried to use that platform in that way as well. You know, I've tried to talk about artist pay and equity in the art world. I've tried to talk about my support for Palestine as an Israeli Jewish person, particularly in the last, couple of years when the whole kind of anti-Semitism thing has, in my opinion, has been completely cynically used, by the right against
silence.
So I've tried to use my platform to talk about these things and to be very vocal about them, and to kind of try and keep or not keep, but like participate in radical discourse that happens online, basically. So for me it has been, but I'm also interested in it as a platform for dissemination, so it's also, I've always been interested in like technology in a weird way. Like I've always been like beguiled by it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and that does make sense, because I'm probably the complete opposite. That I find it, quite, I'm not very good at working with systems that I haven't developed for myself. Then I feel completely incompetent, and so there's a level of that, and then there's a level of fear, because actually once you put something out there and people see it, you can't take it away. Like it's there.
Totally.
And it's not the same for me as kind of formulating ideas in a film or doing a performance that once it's done, it's gone. There's something that's the kind of the trickle out, that you have to really be prepared for it. And I think, and in very, very few words, which I'm not very good at, because
No, totally. And it's scary. It is scary as well, because it's a very violent space, I mean, when we were installing the Turner Prize, I think I put a post up saying that, although this fictional city is defined as a city of women, that it's a trans inclusive, that basically it's a completely inclusive space, imaginary space. And, the anti-trans TERF people got wind of this, and they contacted Turner Contemporary. They were like, they wanted the nomination.
It was awful.
It was awful. I had like 400, messages in the morning when I woke up. And those things are really stressful, for sure. And I don't think everyone needs to be subjected to that. Like, I don't think it's part of it. It just so happened that I don't know why I've gone down that route. And sometimes like it's very adrenalizing in a horrible way as well. But I mean, I felt that there were moments that I felt like I needed to say certain things, and I was ready, for the pushback from it, I guess.
Okay, what else do you fancy? There's here about strategies in terms of engaging with people who are in your work, I think.
Yeah, that would be nice to hear from you about that.
Okay. Well, I suppose the thing that I think is most important for me is about clarity. Even if I don't have clarity myself, it's about the clarity that I communicate to people that I want to work with. So fundamentally, it's about meeting somebody in a space of transparency. So if I'm not sure what I need from someone or what I want from someone, or if I do know and I know that I'm actually going to be taking something, the thing that's most important is that that's really clear from the beginning, and that I am clear about that. So there's no pretense about, it being this thing for both of us, because inevitably there is an exchange that always happens as soon as you work with people. But if you're the person who's making the invite or making the request, then it's about understanding who you are in that dynamic. So that's the first thing. And the other thing is, I suppose I am much more comfortable being around bodies than which is why I struggle with social media, which is why I kind of struggle with teaching online. I mean, I don't struggle with it, but it's more difficult for me than being alongside another human body. And it's a space that I really enjoy and I'm really energized by, and I feel at home with. having proximity to other human bodies. And so whether it's a performance or whether it's working with people in terms of researching or interviewing for a film, or, you know, whichever part of the project it's about those things. So it's about meeting somebody with respect and hopefully integrity and the transparency of the transaction that's happening, paid or unpaid, you know, however that takes its form, that has to be, you know, talked about. And then it's about the fact that I'm energized and I enjoy it, and I hopefully translate that to the people that I'm asking to engage with me. And so for me, it's in the times of COVID, it's much more difficult for me to feel like I'm there and I'm with the people that I'm working with. But I'm trying, and I've got 2 projects that we've done some workshops. We managed to get some workshops in where our bodies were together and we did some voice work, and then it had to go online for a bit, and then we've decided we're going to wait until we can maybe try and go back into the body again. And then another project in which we're doing kind of individual conversations. So the way for me to manage it is an individual online conversation, because feels like there's still something about the body and the eye contact and the intensity that is really important to me when I work on a project. So yeah, it's been hard.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I miss the kind of energetic exchange very, very much. I think after doing, you know, that 5-year project that was very performance heavy, for me, I feel like the work that I'm doing now actually doesn't have bodies in it really. It has like avatars more in it, you know. There's like I still am working with people, but in a much smaller scale. And I think that there was something completely ecstatic for me about working with a group of people on the, you know, 12 performers, and in Glasgow, you know, and there are there's so much that happens that's outside of the work as well, you know, and so many kind of relationships are forged and moments where you're confronted and challenged, you know, and I think that all that is really incredible. But I felt that after doing that for like a long time, doing these large scale kind of lots of people performances, I really wanted to kind of take a step back from that and almost channel that type of energy into something slightly different. I think it's strange, but after doing this project, I really have become completely in love with making.
Yeah.
And I want to do that more, you know. I want to kind of be more in the physical with my own work than the dialogical with the work.
Yes, I understand.
Yeah, but it's just a moment like that. It probably will come back, you know.
Well, maybe, or
Who
maybe
knows? Yeah, who knows? Who knows?
But it's interesting because I feel that, I mean, we've also had questions about motivation throughout this period, and I have sort of seen you, or some of the work that you've been making and how it's been. There seems to have been a drive, like you have really been making. And I mean, maybe you can talk about that, but you know, from my perspective, I've struggled a bit. Like, you know, the first lockdown, I thought, oh, great, I can read loads. I really struggle to read anything. I've only recently started, since probably just before Christmas, have I started to read again, because something happened to me where I just didn't feel like I could read anything. And, you know, and then I'm one of the projects, I'm a film and video umbrella commission, and I am working for the first time, the plan is, with a crew. I've never done it before, and I've got a cat. I've been loaned by the producer, a wonderful producer that I'm working with, loaned a camera to practice with, and I haven't been able to. Again, it's just only been since Christmas that I've managed to kind of take it out of the case and feel it and start to kind of think about working with it. And it's so I've found it quite hard. And so what I have done is loads of walking. Like I've just every day, I think, probably, or as much as I can. Again, I've got a little bit more busier, a little more busy, but I have just walked for kind of an hour and a half. And then I've been writing in fits and starts poetry, but I haven't really been able to settle. It's been quite a hard moment for me. And yet there have been lots of kind of meetings to have with curators, and, you know, projects being kind of shifted around and postponed and pushed back. And I think that's had a real effect on my head and how I can kind of get into the work and the ideas.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, totally. The kind of uncertainty of it is very, very, very difficult. I feel bad because I've been like more productive than I probably have ever been in my life, but it's also to do, for me, it weirdly coincided with me taking a year out of teaching.
Yeah.
After doing it for, when we started going online, I have like very bad anxiety basically, and I have you know, like I disassociate very, very heavily, like to the point where I don't feel in control of it at all, and where, you know, I have to medicate for it basically. So when I started doing a lot of online teaching, I didn't feel I could do it. I didn't feel I was able to spend a whole day looking at a screen and feel well enough to be able to do that over a long period of time, basically.
Yeah.
So I did take a year out, and it was very difficult in terms of the timing of it, because I'm like the head of my little weird family, weirdly. I don't know how that's happened, but I have care, you know, I have financial responsibilities to others.
Yeah.
So it felt a bit like wild to be like, okay, I'm going to take a year out, and I was hoping things would like be more easy than they are, of course.
Yeah.
But you know, it's okay. Like things are okay on that front. But like in terms of the making, it's like every time, not every time, but often in analysis, I cry about how much I am grateful for having the relationship I do with my practice, because I feel like it saved my life, you know, all the time, like all the time. And it's this strange kind of like mechanism or something that even when I feel that my whole being is just flesh without skeleton, somehow this thing, it's like an exoskeleton that kind of moves me and gets me moving. And but then taking this year out, going back to kind of the reality of how you survive as an artist. And I've spoken a lot about my time at Wising as being this moment where I was like, whoa, I spent 7 weeks not going to a job apart from doing my work. So I was also very aware that this year out is a year that I can be in the studio in a way that I'm never able to. I mean, I don't think people understand how little time teaching 3 days a week leaves you, really. You know, it's quite wild. You know, again, the admin of it is like, So I did also make a decision with myself, that I think I would be really unwell if I didn't become completely compulsive about making. And B, that I had to make this time, that it's a gift, you know. It's what I gave myself for as a you know, like after the Turner Prize, I thought I want to do something that makes this really special and not just go back to normal. So I thought giving myself time, a year of being able to not well, I'm still doing loads of other little jobs, but you know, be in the studio.
I mean, I suppose I feel like I recognize that as well when the moment when I decided that I was not going to teach in 2 art schools at the same time, and had assigned myself 1 day in the studio a week, and then was like, oh my goodness, I'm not making anything. So it is about continually, I mean, we had the conversation, didn't we, around Turner Prize, that this was, you know, something that you were thinking about. And after that conversation, I also reduced my hours of teaching, and just thought, you know what, I can do it. It's all right. I can manage it. I'm not, you know, I'm going to be able to feed myself. It will be all right, you know, because I still have that kick in, which is probably my parents in my head. You know, you have to have enough money to survive and pay your
But of course you have that. If there's no one who's giving you money, do you know what I mean?
Yeah, well, it's hard, isn't it? I mean, I guess, yeah. I mean, even maybe for people who have more security, like I don't have children, there are other people who maybe have children, and so there's the kick in that's around something else. So you know, right. How long?
Shall we take? We've got 5 minutes. Should we take one last?
Yeah. What do you think?
Sorry to interrupt you both.
Hello.
Okay, sorry, I just jumped in from there. I suppose I had a couple of, question of my own, really. I thought.
Okay, yeah, sounds good.
Well, I've got so many questions. I just want to thank you both for being so open, really, and just sort of talking really bluntly about it. And particularly thank you to you for continuing to advocate for artists. And I think you're absolutely right that a lot of the sector hasn't done enough and definitely needs to do a lot more. And one thing I was going to mention before I get on to any question was, you mentioned Wising, Ty, and I just wanted to say, you know, Donna, a good friend of both of ours, and Helen, I know you know very well.
Yeah.
Sadly passed away a few weeks ago, was a brilliant advocate for artists, actually, and always when I worked closely with her would be the first one to shout up and say about artist pay and equity as well across the programme. So I mean, it's such a sad loss to the whole sector. Another brilliant advocate for artists, but completely agree that we need to do a lot more. I mean, there was two sort of observations really which were slightly worrying me on a similar theme, which was around when we sort of talk to government and local politicians and are dealing with networks and sort of governance structures. There's a really dangerous sort of alignment around artistic practice and industrial settings. So you talked, Ty, about there not being space to make and to think. And I think this alignment of artists within the framework of an industrial language and production, I think is really, really dangerous. And I think some of the advocacy just has to be for supporting that space. It doesn't always have to be about producing something at the end. And one of the things I've noticed a lot is, in some ways, as institutions, we've probably done a good job of positioning artists as people that can do things and activate things and change things. And what that has meant is, through the pandemic, a lot of people are turning to artists and saying, right, you can sort the high street out and you can sort education out, but you can do it for nothing. And you expected not to be paid. So I have so many questions about how can we get an artist to solve this problem and we don't want to pay them? And it's a real issue. I mean, it's not really a question, I suppose, it's just an observation. But I wondered whether you both had sort of seen that becoming more and more as you move through this pandemic and we come out of it.
Yeah, I mean, sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, it's not that I see it more and more. I think it's always been there. It's there in the same way that it always was. But maybe now we're more aware of it. I think there's been movement around payment and the idea of labour. Artists are talking about it more. I think institutions are talking about it more. But yes, it's this, for me, it's the same old, is that we are expected to be nimble and responsive. And, you know, Ty and I've been talking about the number of contacts that we've had to offer online art lessons. And I know lots of artists who've done that. Oh, let's get somebody who has a practice that's potentially recognised. They can do something online and that will service, in our minds, hundreds of people. And maybe we'll pay them a very small amount of money, or maybe we'll offer it and think it's an opportunity if somebody's more early career maybe than we are now. So it feels like a replication of what's always been here, and that for me feels like it's built on the idea of the poverty-stricken genius, you know, that we can come in. Usually there isn't a lack of respect for the intellect of an artist or the way that we see the world. People might find it challenging or laugh at it perhaps, but it's something that's quite recognised. But it's not recognised, as you say, in a kind of language that's about industry and production and capitalism.
Yeah.
The idea of capital.
I mean, I think that, like, to be incredibly blunt about it, even more blunt, is there are hundreds of possibilities of how institutions could do better. There's like many models. The bottom line is that would demand certain changes within the institutions, and organizations are unwilling to do those changes. It's true that in the current models that organizations use, there might not be a surplus to do this. It is like a kind of network of demands, like you need a certain amount of people to come every year. If you only had 3 exhibitions, it would mean less people coming. There are all these kind of things, but at some point, if the art world wants to remain an elitist sphere where people that have like independent means can become artists, then
carry on.
They have to stop showing work that is in opposition to that, because it's not only then as artists you're being compromised by the fact that you're sustaining these kind of political positions through a variety of different forms of labor to make that possible, but your integrity in terms of being someone who is valued for what you do, and the necessary conditions for what you do are not being met, but also the ethical conditions for what you do are not being met. And that is like too much, basically. It's just too much. And the changes that need to happen are structural. It's not about like saying we'll pay artists £100 more. Put artists on salaries while they're working on an exhibition. Why are artists put on salaries? There's hundreds of different, the thing is that finding solutions isn't the problem. It's a will. Finding the will is the problem, basically.
And finding the bravery, I think.
Yeah, totally.
About having some guts, isn't it? Because, whilst you accept that the government are telling you that you have to have a successful cafe and that you have to have a shop that brings in a certain amount of money, and it's all about, everything is about numbers.
Yeah.
And once you start realizing that if you want to work in a way that's sustainable in terms of art, so it's sustainable for everybody, whether that's audiences and artists and the people who work with artists, then it's got to stop being about numbers.
Yeah, as an institution, I'm hopeful that this can be a period of change, and I suppose that we probably don't have the time for it now, but I was sort of going to ask you that. Do you think this is the moment that change can happen, or do you think there is still a fundamental distance to go?
I'll say very briefly on that. I think that I think that through, very often historically, the work of grassroots, Black, marginalized communities have become kind of used in other ways, or like, revolutionary power has a power that extends beyond just the kind of context within which it's created. And I think that there were incredible discussions happening around the time of the protests, and there were very important discussions being facilitated, and there seemed to be a will. There was it was like a consciousness raising moment where people were like, things aren't right. There's something rotten at the core of how we operate as institutions. But where has that energy gone? Do you know what I mean? Where are these people now? Where are you? Where is everyone? Like, where are these voices that can, musicians have people advocating for them at governmental level. Where are these people? It's like, it can't just be about buildings and the people that work there. It has to extend further. You can't have a program that's about community and care and not care, for the people that are making the work, basically.
I think there are change is slow. So to say, are we in a moment for change? We're always in a moment for change. There's never a right time for change. Change has to be grabbed and taken, but it's slow and it has to happen in different ways. And, there are really powerful ways that are about getting out on the streets, but there are also just the kinds of conversations that we're having here that need to happen everywhere. They need to happen every time a show is an exhibition is talked about in an institution. These kinds of conversations need to happen, not just, oh, hang on, have we got a fee for the artist, or and are we going to pay people who might be participants, or it's the kinds of conversations that do happen in really good model spaces. Weissing we're talking about is absolutely one of those spaces, but there are other means as well. We were talking about, I've just become a co-chair on the Visual Arts Southwest, the network, and and it felt important for me as an artist to not just feel like I'm criticizing, but that feel like I have to use some of the kind of strategies in place to have a voice and to speak up for artists. And so, you know, there are a million different ways that change needs to start happening, and we all have responsibility for it, all of us.
That's right. But that's the main point. It can't just be about artists,
Yeah.
you know, because ultimately we are precarious. Do you see what I mean? Like becoming a kind of target for, you know, it's also not fair. Do you see what I mean? Putting it on the artists to be the advocates, that then they feel that maybe that they might be seen as difficult, or maybe they, you know, that they'll be not invited to do stuff because they've spoken badly about, you know, the structures that they show their work in. You know, that's why it needs people that actually are on the other side of it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Having these conversations, as you say, publicly is part of that, isn't it?
Yes, 100%.
The more that we can do that, you know, and I'm more than happy to be part of that, because I think that involvement as well, that help and support around what things mean and how impact can have, I think is really important. So, I mean, apologies everyone that we've run a little bit over, but
Sorry.
I didn't want to stop us actually, because I just thought there's so many important things to cover there. So it just leaves me to say sort of thank you to both Helen and Ty, and to Sue as well, for your time today, and thank you to everybody for joining us. We will be posting the recordings of these sessions once the whole program is finished, so you will be able to sort of revisit them if you want to. And there are future Talking Loud events that will be announced, and there is another one next week with Giles Smith, who's one of the founding members of the Architecture, Design and Art Collective Assemble. So do tune in for that, and there's more information on the Towner and the Delaware websites. But just thanks again to both of you, and thank you to everybody attending. And we hope to see you again soon, either online or hopefully in bodies next to each other. As Helen, I completely agree with you. I find it's really hard not to be in the same space as everybody else, but I'm slightly nervous people's behaviours have changed fundamentally.
Just one quick thing. Thank you to you as well, and thank you for putting us together, because it's been, you know, we have these conversations privately often, and you know, like Helen and I will be forever bound by this like thing that we made happen. So it was really lovely to be able to talk together publicly with someone I respect and love so much.
Same.
Well, you're very welcome, and thank you everybody, and we'll sign off now, but thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Bye.